Alcoholic beverages will not be sold at Qatar's World Cup stadiums. World Soccer governing body FIFA revealed all of this in a statement on Friday. Now, the announcement has been put in place before Sunday's kickoff of the World Cup, the first to be held in a conservative Muslim country with strict controls on alcohol, the consumption of which is banned in public. Let's get some reaction on this with Professor Michael Goldman, Sports Management Professor at the University of San Francisco. Very good evening to you. Thank you for your time. Now, this U-turn comes 48 hours before the competition's opening game between Qatar and Ecuador at the Al Bayt Stadium in Al-Khor on Sunday. And now this very last-minute U-turn, fans are not impressed. What happened?
Yeah, it is a bit of a last-minute surprise. And we have seen over the last week a number of lastminute.com announcements, which seem to be driven by the Supreme Council of Sport in Qatar, the local organizing committee, and perhaps applying some late-minute pressure to FIFA. And some would say going against the contract they signed as the host country. So yes, fans, especially perhaps those from Europe who are used to having a pint as they're watching the game, they certainly are up in arms. And so, you know, it really raises this question of the extent to which Qatar is welcoming the world for a typical World Cup, or whether fans from around the world need to be more respectful and understanding of the kind of cultural and social context of the host country of this year's World Cup.
The Footballers Supporters Association has also weighed in on this matter. They're saying that a lack of communication and clarity from the organizing committee is really the big problem here. They say that supporters are now left wondering what's next. Could there be a change in promises around transport, accommodation, or even some other cultural changes?
There certainly are a lot of questions, and I think one of the big debates at the moment is the power of Qatar as the host country versus FIFA. And of course, in South Africa, we know well the power of FIFA and the role that FIFA played in 2010, as well as a number of other World Cups. And perhaps this is a balancing of the power between the host country and city and stadiums and the FIFA organization that in the past really has taken over a country in a large respect when hosting the World Cup. I'm a bit more cautious about whether we'll see additional constraints on fans in those kind of transportation areas, but certainly the cultural, social, religious aspects of hosting a World Cup in Qatar, I think is something that may surprise and may hit some of the fans as they think about how they celebrate their fandom.
I mean, speaking about the power dynamics that you make mention of, Qatar's ban on beer in stadiums has really complicated FIFA's relationship now with big sponsors, which around $75 million has been spent every 4 years to be associated with the World Cup, the big beer sponsor. Do you think that they will still want to fund the World Cup going forward? Could this really dampen the whole process in the future?
I think it certainly raises questions for AB InBev, our friends at SAB Miller, and other World Cup and FIFA partners around the value proposition, around the return on investment. So certainly AB InBev, Budweiser in this case, are losing out on some of those pouring rights that they would have contractually been allowed to have and would have expected in the actual sports facilities, the stadiums. And we've really seen over the last week how those have been moved outside the stadium and then further around the stadium and now not at all in the stadium. There certainly are other places where Budweiser would have official pouring rights, and so from a revenue point of view, from a volume point of view, those expectations would be met, but certainly the stadiums are critical components of those revenue and volume expectations. From a brand point of view, we're seeing a lot less coverage of Budweiser and other sponsors in Qatar. In a sense, it seems like a much cleaner World Cup from a branding and exposure point of view than maybe we're used to in South Africa and in other places. And so that's interesting in terms of the brand exposure returns that sponsors would be expecting. I suspect that we'll see Anheuser-Busch and others continue to activate their sponsorships around the world. They've spoken over the last few days about how their sponsorship activations, their branding campaigns, their social media campaigns around the world will continue as they celebrate the world's most wonderful game with fans around the world. But actually at the game, that's going to be a little bit different for perhaps the million or just over 1 million people that will travel to Qatar over the next month.
What will this mean for the game and the culture of alcohol and sports and big sporting events like this?
Well, I mean, it's good and bad, right? I mean, I think we've seen some of the excesses of alcohol in European football, in international football, for example, and so some may argue that this is not a bad thing. And certainly if we think more inclusively and we think about a global football culture, which is not just Western European, thinking differently about where is alcohol available and how much alcohol is available sounds smart and sounds responsible, and certainly taps into the geopolitics of football that continues to change as the power base of football shifts to the east, shifts to the Middle East, and shifts to China, away from Western Europe. And so that will continue to happen. Will English fans in Western Europe jump up and down and be quite grumpy about that? Sure, as I think any change is uncomfortable. But it really talks to a more inclusive, a more global approach to our game. And that's not too dissimilar from what we've seen in cricket, for example, as well as a bunch of American sports here in the U.S., where when we think beyond some of the more traditional white, male, Western approaches to sports fandom, we need to be more inclusive. We need to think about how the environment is welcoming, the environment is more responsible, more family-friendly. And so I think many would say this is not necessarily a bad thing, although there will certainly be a lot of noise over the next few days as people get used to it.
Should people now perhaps go against what has been said and what has been concluded? What are the repercussions?
I think there's going to be lots of protests, and rightly so. We have seen thousands of people, unfortunately, lose their lives in the building of the facilities for the World Cup. And Qatar has spent over $200 billion investing in creating this World Cup, and some would say over $100 million buying the votes for the World Cup, as we've seen corruption in the past and suspect we'll see it going forward around the awarding of the World Cup. So I think the issue around hosting the World Cup in Qatar is really about the extent to which Qatar can use this event soft power-wise. So how do they influence the rest of the world? It's not just about tourists coming. It's not just about business coming across. It's about Qatar using this event to reposition themselves. They're in a tough part of the world, politically, geopolitically, a tough spot that they locate themselves in. And so for Qatari Airways, for some of the business parts, for some of the investments of Qatar, this is an important event to use in some way.
Very well. Thank you so much. Thanks for weighing in on this discussion. Professor Michael Goldman, Sports Management Professor at the University of San Francisco. Thank you for your time.